The sun rose slowly over the hills of Dorset, painting the fields in a soft gold. The smell of damp earth lingered in the morning air, and the faint sound of roosters carried through the valley. Two men worked side by side on a small farm, Elias and Thomas. They had been friends since childhood, though time had carved different lines into their faces. Elias, tall and quiet, carried the calmness of someone who had learned to bend without breaking. Thomas, broader and louder, wore his frustration like a second skin. That morning, as they began repairing the wooden fence along the sheep pasture, Thomas kicked at a broken post and cursed. Bloody things rotted again. Every year it's the same. Fix one part, another falls apart. This farm's cursed, I tell you. Elias knelt down beside the post, his hands steady. Wood doesn't last forever, Tom. The rain does what it does. Best to just fix it before the sheep wander off. Thomas snorted. You talk like that as if it's easy. You know what I see every morning? More work, less pay. My back's giving out, and the world doesn't care. Elias didn't argue. He pressed the new post into place and began to hammer, each strike even and deliberate. The world doesn't care, he said softly, but that's not the world's fault. Thomas frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Elias smiled faintly. It means we don't get to choose the weather or the soil, Tom, but we can still choose how we plant. Thomas shook his head. You and your calm words. You think being patient feeds a man? Try telling that to my wife when there's no bread left. Elias kept hammering. Maybe patience doesn't fill your stomach, but complaining empties your heart. Thomas grumbled something under his breath and turned away, muttering about how Elias always sounded like an old preacher. But deep down, something about those words stuck to him, like a seed buried under cold soil. By noon, the sky had turned gray and rain began to drizzle. The wind carried the smell of wet hay and distant smoke from the village chimneys. Thomas threw down his gloves. That's it. I'm not getting soaked again for this damn fence. Let it break. Let the sheep wander. Maybe then the boss will finally fix the whole thing properly. Elias didn't lift his head. If the sheep wander, it's us who'll chase them tomorrow. Thomas sighed, pulling his coat tighter. Why do you always act like it's your fault when things go wrong? Elias looked up at him. His eyes were calm, the color of the cloudy sky. Because it's easier to fix what's mine than to fix what's not. Thomas blinked, unsure what to say. There was something disarming about Elias's steadiness, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. A few days later, the farm owner, Mr. Harland, came to inspect the fields. He was a practical man, old but sharp, and he noticed everything. When he reached the fence, he ran a hand along the wood. This part's solid, he said, nodding toward Elias's section. Then he turned to the other end, where Thomas had worked. The posts wobbled slightly. This side will need redoing, Mr. Harland said curtly. Can't have weak spots before winter. Thomas's jaw tightened. It's not my fault, sir. The wood was bad and it rained. Mr. Harland cut him off. It rains on everyone, Thomas. He walked away, leaving Thomas staring after him in silence. Elias didn't gloat or even look at his friend. He just picked up his tools and began helping fix the weak posts. After a few minutes, Thomas muttered, "You're not even angry?" Elias wiped his hands. What for? Anger doesn't straighten fences. For the first time, Thomas had no comeback. He bent down beside Elias and helped. They worked in silence, the sound of hammering blending with the wind. That evening, after the rain stopped, they sat by the barn. The sunset spread across the horizon like spilled honey. The sheep grazed quietly in the distance. Thomas broke the silence. "You know, when I was younger, I thought if I worked hard enough, life would get easier. But it just feels like the same struggle year after year." Elias chuckled softly. "Maybe that's because life isn't a hill you climb once. It's a field you tend every day." Thomas looked at him, confused but curious. Elias continued, "My father used to say, a farmer's peace isn't in the harvest, it's in the planting. I think he meant that the joy's not in what we finish, but in what we keep showing up for." Thomas leaned back, watching the sky fade from gold to gray. "Maybe your father never had to fix fences in the rain." Elias smiled. "He did, but he also taught me to stop arguing with the clouds." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. Then, quietly, Thomas said, "Maybe I've been arguing with the clouds for too long." Elias didn't reply. He just passed Thomas a cup of tea from his thermos and said, "Drink before it gets cold." The next morning, Thomas came earlier than usual. The air was crisp and clean after the rain, and the fields shimmered with dew. Elias was already there, sharpening his tools. Thomas hesitated, then said, "About yesterday. You were right." Elias raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About fixing what's mine," Thomas said. "I can't change the weather, but maybe I can build a better fence." Elias handed him a hammer with a smile. "That's all any of us can do." And for the first time in a long while, Thomas worked without complaint. The rhythm of their hammers echoed across the valley, steady, patient, and almost peaceful. The fence would take another week to finish, but that didn't matter. For the first time, Thomas wasn't racing against the world. He was working with it. Summer rolled into autumn. The once green hills turned shades of amber and brown, and the mornings grew colder. On the Harland farm, work never truly stopped. It only changed shape. When the fence was done, there were barns to clean, tools to mend, and animals to prepare for winter. Thomas had changed too. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in small, steady steps. The kind that only those who looked closely could see. He no longer arrived late with a scowl or muttered under his breath about the weather. Instead, he came early, sometimes before sunrise, to help Elias check the fences and feed the sheep. His words grew fewer, his hands surer. The other workers began to notice. One morning, young Peter, a new farmhand barely 20, complained as he hauled hay into the barn. "This work's never ending," he grumbled. "By the time we're done, the sun's gone and so's my energy. Doesn't seem fair." Thomas, stacking bales nearby, looked up with a faint smile. "Fair. No one said it would be. But you'll sleep better tonight if you give it your best." Peter frowned. "Easy for you to say? You've been doing this for years." Thomas chuckled. "That's exactly why I say it." He wiped his brow and added, "You spend all your breath hating the job, and you'll have none left to do it. Trust me, I tried that way for a long time. It didn't build much, except my own misery." Elias, passing by with a wheelbarrow, caught the last part and smiled quietly. Thomas didn't notice. He was too busy working, and for once, that was exactly the point. Later that week, Mr. Harland gathered everyone by the barn. His old coat flapped in the cool wind, and his voice carried over the sound of bleating sheep. "Winter's coming early this year," he announced. "We'll need to reinforce the barns and move the feed inside by next week. I'll be choosing someone to oversee the storage work. It's a tough job. Takes someone steady, someone I can trust." Thomas felt a flicker of something in his chest. Not pride, not quite hope either. More like a quiet readiness. He didn't say anything, didn't look at Elias, just kept his head down and worked through the day. By dusk, as the others packed up, Mr. Harlan called out, "Thomas, a word." The man turned, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Yes, sir?" Harlan studied him for a long moment. "You've changed, Thomas. Used to be I'd hear you before I saw you, always complaining about something. Haven't heard a word in months. What happened?" Thomas gave a small, almost shy laugh. "Guess I ran out of things worth saying." Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe you started listening to the right things." He nodded toward the barn. "You'll oversee the storage team this week. Elias will help you. Make sure nothing spoils before the cold hits." Thomas blinked, surprised. "Me? Are you sure?" Harlan smiled. "You've earned it. You fix more than fences these days." That night, as the wind howled outside the workers' cottage, Elias and Thomas sat by the small fireplace. A pot of tea steamed between them. Elias broke the silence first. "So, the new supervisor, huh?" Thomas laughed quietly. "Don't start with that. I'm just glad Harlan didn't change his mind halfway." Elias looked at him over the rim of his cup. "You deserve it. You've worked hard." Thomas shook his head. "Maybe. But what really changed wasn't the work. It was me. I used to think everything was out to get me. The weather, the tools, the boss, even you sometimes." He stared into the fire for a moment, watching the wood crackle. "But the truth is, it wasn't the world that needed fixing. It was the way I saw it." Elias nodded slowly. "That's a harder repair than any fence." Thomas smiled. "Aye, but once you stop fighting the rain, it's easier to plant." They both sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty, the sound of two men who no longer needed words to understand each other. Over the next few weeks, the storage work went smoother than anyone expected. Thomas planned carefully, kept his team steady, and stayed calm even when the weather turned rough. When a sudden frost came early and froze the pipes one morning, Peter, the young farmhand, panicked. "The feed'll spoil! We're doomed!" Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Panicking won't thaw the pipes. Grab the lanterns. We'll work through the night if we must." And they did. Elias, Peter, and the others followed Thomas's quiet determination. By dawn, the feed was safe, the frost melting, and the barn warm with the smell of hay and effort well spent. When Mr. Harlan came to check, he found Thomas still awake, hands covered in dirt, but eyes alive. The old man smiled and said, "I've seen many winters, son, but it's rare to find someone who works with the storm instead of against it." Thomas just nodded, too tired to speak, though his heart felt lighter than it had in years. Winter finally settled over the valley. The fields turned white, and the world grew quiet. Inside the barn, the animals rested, the fences held, and the fire burned gently. One evening, Peter approached Thomas and said, "You know, I used to think you were just another grumpy old worker, but now, you make it look easy." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "Easy? No, lad. It's never easy. But it's lighter when you stop dragging your complaints along." He looked out toward the darkening sky, where snow began to fall softly. "You can't stop the snow," he said, "but you can build your fire stronger." Peter didn't fully understand then, but years later he would remember those words, the way Thomas said them, not as advice, but as truth carved from experience. When spring returned months later, the fields bloomed again. Mr. Harland, older now and walking with a cane, stood with Thomas and Elias at the edge of the pasture. The fence still stood, strong, straight, and unbroken. Harland smiled. "It's a fine thing, seeing work last." Elias nodded. "A good fence stands because it's built with care," Thomas added quietly. "And because someone stopped blaming the rain." They all laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from shared struggle and earned peace. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the valley, Thomas picked up a small rock and turned it in his hand. "Funny," he said. "I used to think life was like this. Hard, cold, heavy. But now I see it's just part of the wall we build. Every stone matters, even the ones we used to curse." Elias smiled. "Then you've learned the real farmer's wisdom." "What's that?" Thomas asked. "That the soil doesn't change for us. We change for the soil." Thomas looked out at the endless fields, breathing in the scent of fresh grass and earth. He didn't need to reply. The peace in his chest said enough. Complaining doesn't fix the weather. It only wastes the season. But when we accept what is and work with it, even the hardest soil can bear fruit. Every moment we spend complaining is a moment stolen from progress. When we fixate on what's wrong, our mind narrows, trapped in frustration and negativity. Yet the instant we shift from "why is this happening" to "what can I do about it," something profound changes inside us. Our brain switches from emotional resistance to problem-solving mode. Stress hormones drop, creativity rises, and suddenly, what once felt impossible becomes manageable. Acceptance is not weakness. It's the gateway to action. The farmer who stops cursing the rain begins to build better drainage. The worker who stops blaming the tools starts learning how to use them more wisely. By focusing on solutions instead of complaints, we reclaim our power. The burden in our chest lightens, and energy once spent on frustration fuels real improvement. In the end, peace of mind isn't found in a perfect world. It's found in how calmly and wisely we respond to an imperfect one.